So I'll begin now. Greetings, everyone. My name is Kelvin. I work for Moonee Valley Libraries, and I'd like to welcome you all to another of Moonee Valley Libraries online author events. Tonight we have the pleasure to have Christian White talk about his latest novel, The Wife and the Widow, and also give us some hints about what the follow-up will be. Before I proceed any further, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge on behalf of Moonee Valley City Council, the traditional custodians of this land I'm currently broadcasting from, the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, their spirits, ancestors, elders and community members past and present. Moonee Valley is proud of its diverse community and acknowledges the contributions that all people make to this vibrant and inclusive municipality. So tonight's talk by Christian is about his book, The Wife and the Widow. First, a little background on Christian. Many of you will have first heard of Christian through his debut novel, The Nowhere Child. Some of you may have even come to the author event at St Merrifield in 2018 to hear him talk about it. His book won the 2017 Wheeler Centre Victorian Premier Literary Award for Best Unpublished Manuscript and was shortlisted for major awards, as has his follow-up second novel. He's also displayed his versatility in co-writing screenplays for TV, with a soon-to-be released Netflix miniseries called Clickbait, and he's also written for film with the feature film Relic. He's currently working on his third novel. Please welcome Christian White.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for not coming, but for being there, for letting me into your homes. I hope you're all staying safe and sane during lockdown 2.0. It's a little harder. Is it just me, or is this one a little bit harder? The first one was there was a slight sort of novelty value to the first one, and it was kind of, I don't want to say enjoyable because there was a lot of death and unemployment, but it was this one is much more challenging so far. I have been using my time wisely. One of the things I'm working on is book 3, which, as you heard in that wonderful intro, I'll chat about a little later. Basically, yeah, I'm just going to sort of ramble away for 30 minutes, and then we'll have 30 minutes answering questions. Generally, what I do is I redeem myself in the question and answer period, because I answer the questions you actually are here to have answered, and not just listening to me ramble. So in the meantime, if you have any questions, as you heard, pop them in the chat, and then we'll get to them about the halfway point. Any questions we don't answer, I should say, I have a website, christian-white.com. Anything we don't get to, or if you're afraid to ask in a public setting, feel free to, you can email me through there. It takes, all emails come directly to me. It takes me a little bit of time to get to them, but I always reply to all of them unless they're nasty, and then I try not to. So yeah, basically tonight I'm here to talk about The Wife and the Widow, my second book. Having said that, no topic is out of bounds. So feel free to ask me questions about love and relationships. No, just kidding. About any of my other projects or anything you'd like to know, really. So for those who don't know, The Wife and the Widow, it's a story about, follows two women, the wife of a man who goes missing and the wife of a man accused of murder. That sounds incredibly vague, but I have to be vague to avoid spoilers. That's one of the things you learn very early on writing mysteries and thrillers, is how to talk about books in the most vague way possible. So I apologize in advance. It's set in a fictional town called Bellport, a little island town in Victoria, which is kind of a hybrid of a few places I've lived and where I've grown up. I was born on the Mornington Peninsula, and I've just since moved back, weirdly. It's this weird, I did the thing that I never said I would do. I thought I got out of my hometown and I was like, I'm never going to go back, but I've come back. And I was also living in Ocean Grove on the Bellarine Peninsula for a while. So really I drew a lot of inspiration from those places for the setting of the book. I think for a long time, growing up in sort of the Mornington Peninsula is more so now, but even when I was growing up in the 90s, it was a real tourist place, which meant in the summer, you know, it's bustling and the population swells and there's all these people everywhere. But in the winter, everyone kind of just drifts away, and there's this sort of, you know, there's big holiday houses that are left empty, and, you know, even some businesses close, not so much anymore, but when I was a kid, they would. And there was something about that that just was super, super interesting, and eerie and creepy to me. So that's why I said it. That's why I said it there. It was a challenging book to write because firstly, it was, you know, it's fantastic. I feel so blessed that I get to write books for a living. That's been my dream forever. So, you know, I'm so thankful and so blessed. So all of that being said, it was a really challenging book to write because that second album cliche is really true. So with my first book, The Nowhere Child, that was the fifth manuscript I had started or tried to write, and only the second one I'd finished. And the first I thought was anywhere near good enough to show anyone. And obviously I would dream about being published. It was this fantasy I'd have over and over, but I never really thought it would genuinely happen. And there was a strange kind of freedom in that, you know, now looking back on it. Obviously I'm very happy to be where I am, but there was a weird freedom writing, not thinking anyone was ever going to read it. You know, that was sort of so strong in my mind that I had a very, very strong image of myself. I sort of cast my mind forward and I could imagine myself as a 93, 94-year-old man and dead, you know, I've died. And my grandkids have come over. I live in a little assisted living unit, you know, it's this little shoebox place. And my grandkids come over and they're cleaning up and it's just kind of a hassle. And I open this little drawer, and in the drawer is just this stack of dusty, cobwebby, unpublished manuscripts. You know, that was really what I thought I was going to leave behind. You know, this is unpublished work. And, you know, in a way I was sort of fine with that if that was my fate, so be it. Obviously I'm very glad that, you know, I've gone in the direction I have. But yeah, so when my first book came out and it was received really, really well, and it sold all around the world, and it people really liked it, you know, which was incredible. I'd never considered that. I'd fantasized about being published, but I never fantasized about people actually responding to it positively and things like that. So when that happened, it was incredible, but at the same time, it made the second book really, really challenging because I had these two things that I really didn't have with the Nowhere Child, which was a deadline. That was scary enough. I had a year to write it, and I took a million years to write The Nowhere Child. And I also had an audience, you know, a built-in audience, people who were waiting to read the second book. You know, I get a lot of emails from readers, and I get these wonderful, wonderful, beautiful emails from readers. And they would say all these nice things, and they'd often sign their email off with a variation of, you know, I can't wait for your next book. I hope you're working on your next book. Can't wait for your next book. And I'm glad I didn't do this, but I often felt like writing back saying, well, don't get too excited because it might be terrible. Maybe I'm a one-hit wonder. You know, I don't know. And I did spend a lot of the writing of The Wife and the Widow was spent terrified, really. The first half, I think, was a really terrifying experience. You know, I really had to rely a couple of times. My publisher had to talk me in from the ledge, and my wife as well. And really, what happened was, I guess the corner I turned was two things really. I sort of leant back into. I'm yet to find a way to say this that's not pretentious, so forgive me, but I leant back into my writing philosophy. You know, I have a writing philosophy, and it's a really simple one. It's just to write things that I would want to read, or when I'm working in film and TV, write things that I would want to watch, you know. And I feel like that if I do that, then I'm a relatively normal person, I like to think. So if I'm a good audience for it, hopefully there'll be others. And that's really, I sort of really leaned into that. And as soon as I that sort of sunk in and clicked in, I was able to stop obsessing about whether or not the second book was going to be too much like the first one or not enough like the first one, and stop trying to second guess what people wanted, and just went ahead and wrote it. And that was the one major thing I did. And then another thing I did was I really relied on the people around me, and that was sort of twofold. My publisher and my editor. I really just, there's this weird thing where, especially early on in your career, you don't want to show anyone your work that's not perfect. You want to be perfect. You want everyone to be really impressed by you all the time. And my publishers were, with the first book, I had this full manuscript and everything. And I kind of I felt like I owed them, that they'd signed me for 2 books, and I felt like I owed them, and I didn't want to screw it up, and I didn't want to disappoint them. So a lot of it was sort of, I didn't want to show them my work too early. And I kind of just got over that, and because I had to, and I just started showing them my work earlier than I'd ever showed anyone my work. Stephen King has this thing where he says you should write with the door closed, rewrite with the door open. And what he means by that is, on one hand, literally shut the door to your distractions when you're writing that first draft. But what he also means is, when you're writing your first draft, you shut the door, and so you kind of can write without fear of judgment. And then when it comes time for the second draft, you need to open that door and let other people in and listen to opinions and things like that. And that feeling of opening the door, I've described it in the past as, showing someone your manuscript before you think it's ready is like standing naked in front of someone for the first time. And you just sort of look down at yourself, and you're like, I'm so sorry. This is disgusting. I don't know what that is. And there could be less fat here. And I'm so sorry, but this is the best. This is the best I have, this is the best I could do. So really, that was a big fear of mine, showing people my work earlier. And that's just what I did with the second book. I just showed them The Wife and the Widow really early. It was under word count. The last chapter was just in dot points. There was all this kind of, I'd fudged certain plot points and everything. But as soon as I got over it, they said, oh, great. This is great. Now let's work together and see if we can make it better. And the other person in my life that I leaned on was my wife, Summer. She's a creative genius, really. She's a wonderful resource to have. I don't think it always works showing your partner your work early and getting feedback and advice, because I think we have a tendency to tell the people we love what they want to hear, and sort of pulling punches. But luckily, my wife does not have that problem. She can tell me what's working in my work, but also tell me what's not working, more importantly. And really, I find it interesting to talk about these things, because I don't know if it's a preconception, or maybe people were saying this that I just wasn't listening. But before I was published, I had this idea that authors were these literary geniuses who just wrote in a vacuum. And I'm sure some of them do. Some of them are amazing. But I am not one of those people. I do rely on the people around me. And I kind of like talking about that, because I don't think there's certain things that I didn't hear before I was published that I think would have helped me a little bit. Before I was published, I've never had an issue with writer's block or anything like that. And because I worked a million casual jobs while I was trying to be a writer. So I always had to kind of find time, on the weekends and at night, and sometimes at work, so that was never a problem. But I had a huge problem with showing my work to people. I really was obsessed with this idea of making it perfect. I thought you only had, one shot and that's it. It's like the Eminem song. But really what I've learned since is that's not the case. And actually, if any writers are watching this, if you take one thing away from tonight, remember that your work doesn't have to be perfect before you send it off. If you wait for it to be perfect, you'll never send it. But also editors and publishers and agents, they're not looking for something perfect. They're looking for something that they can bring their voice to, and something that they can and help make better, you know. So that's a little nugget of advice. You know, I was mentioning Summer, my wife, and she helped really with the second book in two significant ways. One of them a bit more major. The first one is, and again, apologies, I'll have to dance around it, but for people who haven't read it yet, there's a significant twist in the book. Some people tell me that in itself is a spoiler, just saying that there is a twist. So I'm sorry if you're one of those people. But there's a twist. I won't say what the twist is, but it's an ambitious kind of twist. And I had an idea of what I wanted that twist to be, but I had no idea how to do it at all. And I was at a loss, and I wasted weeks and weeks, no exaggeration, trying to figure it out. And I came so close to, you know, scrapping everything and rethinking and going back to the drawing board. And what I did one day was, I was living at Ocean Grove when I wrote the book, and there was this little lake near our house. And every afternoon, my wife and I, my dog is actually, she's got beds. You can actually see her just there. She has beds everywhere and a couch to get on, but for some reason, she likes to sleep on that floor. She's not dead either, believe me. She probably won't move for the duration of this talk, but that's generally what she does. She's a greyhound and really the greatest being, the greatest living creature in the history of planet Earth. I love her so much. But anyway, we were walking around this lake, and I laid out these problems. I said, look, I've got this twist, and this is what I want the twist to do, but I don't know how. And Summer was quiet for what was an irritatingly short period of time. And then she said, well, what if X, Y, and Z happens? And she completely solved the problem. So basically the twist I owe to her, which is what people seem to respond to and really like about the book, which means, you know, if we ever get a divorce, she'll have an ironclad case against me. Honestly, I've said it publicly now. So, and the other thing that she really helped me with was research. So with my books, I do generally, depending on what I'm researching, but I like to do a lot of research. I call it research now. And this is one of the best things about writing full time, is that you can call it research when really it's just procrastination. Before I was a professional writer, I would just procrastinate, you know, in these sort of interests. And I have these kind of weird interests, and I like to explore them in the books and stuff. But one of the things that's explored in The Wife and the Widow is taxidermy, this very strange, bizarre, weird art of taxidermy. And people say, you know, one of the main characters, Abby, she's an amateur taxidermist. And people have asked me in the past, you know, what was that like? Did you do a lot of research? You know, what did you go and talk to people? And I didn't have to, because my wife, Summer, is a weirdo, and she is an amateur taxidermist. So really all of that stuff came from all the tools in Abby's chest, all the things she uses, the little glass eyeballs, everything just came from going to, you know, some little creepy area and looking at the things and writing them down, you know. In the book, this happens, and this is exactly like real life. So what would happen is, you know, someone does animals that have died of natural causes, which is good. You know, I don't eat meat, so it's good. You know, it would be weird otherwise. It would be a bit of a deal breaker. But what that means is that as the word spreads in your friendship group, in your community, people will find dead things on the side of the road and then text us. You know, I got a text from someone, a friend of mine who'd actually never met you know, an old friend, and it was a picture of a dead bat, and it just said, "Does Summer want this?" And I was thinking, what sort of mistakes have I made to lead that now this is my life? I'm getting text messages, you know, about a dead bat. And I would ask Some, "Do you want this?" And she would say, "Well, can you check how decomposed it is? How many maggots are on?" I was like, you know what? I'm just going to pass you the phone. But yeah, so really, I got way off track then. This is why I should make notes for these sort of things. But anyway, you know, another thing I really wanted to explore in The Wife and the Widow was, it's the tagline. It's right in the book, which is how well do we really know the people we love? And that's a real deep fear of mine. This idea that you might have someone in your life really close to you, and they might be keeping a secret from you that would completely change everything. And that's a real fear of mine. It's funny when you start to write and build up a bit of a body of work, you start to learn things about yourself. I never really knew that was a fear I had, but there's these reoccurring things in your work that you begin to, psychoanalyze yourself and think, well, I keep writing about this same thing. Because with The Nowhere Child, that's really what that is about. That's about as well. The Nowhere Child, for those who don't know, it's about this Australian woman who is, she's a photography teacher, just living a very normal life. And she's approached by this very mysterious accountant. And he says, I've been investigating this kidnapping that took place back in the early 90s. This little girl got kidnapped from this small town in Kentucky called Manson. And I believe you are that little girl who went missing. I think that who you think are your parents are actually your kidnappers. And, without spoiling anything, she finds enough, she kind of, looks into her family history a bit and finds enough compelling evidence to go to Kentucky to try to investigate, but really the crux of that book is just, how well do we know the people we love, and what happens if those closest to us are lying. In that book, it was the parents, and in The Wife and the Widow, it's your partner. It's that both of these women, their husbands have been keeping secrets, and it's this idea that what that means and how that affects you when you uncover those secrets. Another fear of mine, and actually another sort of thing, thinking about it, I was thinking about fears and things like that. Another fear of mine is my nan has dementia. She's 100 years old. She just turned 100 in July. She got a letter from the Queen and all this kind of crazy stuff, but she's had dementia for the last 7 or 8 years, and her mind has been slowly going, and now it's really completely gone. And that's a big fear of mine. I've been interested in memory. This is what I'm talking about when I would procrastinate with these subjects and just kind of jam them together for my books. The Nowhere Child was really an obsession with memory and how memory works. And I just jammed that together with, this will make me sound like a psychopath if you've not read the book, but I was also really interested in Pentecostal snake handling, which is this fringe religion that takes place in a few states in the American South. And they worship God by handling venomous snakes and scorpions and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, the which is we could talk for hours just on that subject. But really the memory, this obsession with memory, came from talking to my nan and having this really sort of heartbreaking conversation with her, where I had to remind her who I was, and I'm your grandson Christian, and this is your daughter Kira, and all this sort of stuff. And I began to think about how memory works, and then I just kind of started to research it for fun. And I came across this theory called decay theory, which is actually the original title of the Nowhere Child manuscript. It got changed because everyone on the planet agreed that it was a terrible title, and thank God, the Nowhere Child is a much better title. And anyway, the decay theory suggests that when we form a memory, that memory fades due to the passage of time, which seems sort of obvious when you first hear it. But as you go a little deeper, it talks about how when we create a memory, you create this thing called a neurochemical trace, which in the book I talk about it. It's sort of a thread that you tug on to retrieve that memory. And decay theory suggests that over time, if you don't access that memory, you don't tug on that memory enough, the thread will fray and break, but the memory itself remains whole, and it's just sort of thumping around your head. You just don't have access to it, and that's a real fear of mine. Not being able to access or trust your memories, and this is another theme I keep coming back to. I'm just thinking if I can talk about it with The Wife and the Widow without spoilers, but I won't. I'll leave it alone. I wrote a film. I co-wrote a film called Relic. It's on Stan right now. It's a horror film, but it's sort of a family drama as well. And really, that's all about dementia. Talking about the way these themes just keep just sort of you know, it's being stitched into your work subconsciously. It's about dementia. It's about 3 generations of women, a daughter, the mother, and the grandmother has dementia, and it kind of imagines it. The dementia sort of manifests as this sort of monstrous force, basically. So yeah, I think that there's all these recurring themes. I should quickly we'll go to questions in a couple of minutes, but I should quickly talk about the third book. I got way off, but I kind of got back. The third book, actually, this is a great segue, because speaking of things that are interesting, one of the things that I'm interested in exploring in the third book is this thing called satanic panic, which is, it might be familiar to some of you, but in the late 80s and early 90s, this kind of form of mass hysteria swept the world, America in particular, and Australia as well, and the UK and things like that. And basically this, I guess you'd call them rumors, but they're stronger than that. These ideas began to emerge that there's all these roaming cults of people who worship Satan. And there were these reports of ritualistic abuse and secret tunnels and blood sacrifices. And it all starts from a book called Michelle Remembers, which was written in the early 80s. I believe she was a Canadian woman who went under hypnosis and had all these repressed memories of being abused by Satanists. And so this mass hysteria swept the world. There were people in daycare centers that got charged for child abuse because the kids were saying all this crazy stuff, but what happened is we realized there was actually zero evidence for any of it actually happening. And the strongest theory is none of it ever actually happened. It was just this form of mass hysteria spread largely by the media. And I've been really interested in exploring kind of that for a while. So book 3, it kind of delves into that a little bit. It's also about, book 3 is still very new. So very early. These are very early days pitching it. So I'm getting better at it. But it's sort of a crime book. I wanted to write a crime book about a crime that you're never actually sure if it happened or not. And it sort of it explores that sort of stuff. It's set in the late 80s in a little seaside suburb on the Mornington Peninsula, which is where I grew up. And it's just my first 2 books are alternating chapters, alternating perspectives. In The Nowhere Child, it goes between Kim's chapters now, and then it explores also what happened in the 1990s in Kentucky, the events surrounding this little girl. And with The Wife and the Widow, it splits between the wife, the widow, the wife, the widow. So it's from these 2 different women's perspective. This one is just, chronological. Just this thing happens and it's all one perspective, which has been an absolute delight. I originally wrote alternating perspectives because I was under the very naive impression that it would be easier because, writing 80,000 words, that's so much. But if I split the story into 2, this is 2 small 40,000 words, I can do that. And of course, it ended up being way harder than if I just wrote from a single perspective. But anyway, I reckon we should, if there are questions, maybe we should go to questions now. I can continue to ramble for as long all night, but if we want to go to questions, that would be, let's do it. I think there he is.
Hi, yes. Let's do that. So thanks for that, Christian. That was really interesting. So move on to the first question. It is in a movie adaptation of the novel, who would be your dream actress to play Abby and Kate?
This is such a difficult question. I've been asked this before, and I find it so difficult to answer because I really don't. I find it really, really difficult to visualize. I really don't know. I know it's like the most disappointing answer, but I really have no idea. I think about great Australian actors that I really like. There's a lot of them, like Rose Byrne and people like that. I think would be really cool. But I just don't know, and I think it's partly because I find it really hard to visualize them a different way than they are in my head. Not to say that that's not really exciting for me, but it's a really, really difficult thing to visualize. I should say though, while we're on the topic, the rights, I did sell the rights to the Nowhere Child, the screen rights, and there's everything takes time, but there's some hopefully some news, some really cool things actually happening that we can't talk about yet, but hopefully we'll be able to release some news soon. Again, I'm just super vague tonight. And also hopefully I'll be able to release some stuff about The Wife and the Widow screen rights as well. But it's a wild idea. You know, I know I've not given you a satisfying answer about the cast, but I think the idea that just seeing it happen and being part of just the small things that are happening so far is such a fantastic, surreal, and bizarre experience. You know, you for me, when I fantasized about being published, it was almost like I visualized this white wall, and I kind of fantasized about the idea of, oh, imagine if all I had to do all day was write, but I didn't really think about it. I didn't think about things like screen adaptations and all that sort of stuff. So it's really just the weirdest thing. But no, I don't have any good answer to the cast thing. If you have good theories, please tell me, and I will steal it from you and copy you next time someone asks me, because I really need to come up with a good answer to that question.
There's also another question here around movie deals for your books. So I think you've probably answered that. I suppose there's also TV, cable television as well. That's becoming a big thing now. So any bites from any of the cable?
Yeah, well, the Nowhere Child adaptation. I'm just trying to think of how much I'm allowed to reveal. But hypothetically it would be a mini series, a television series. So I think that, which I think is really exciting. You know, I think with The Wife and the Widow, it for me, it's probably just a movie. I think it's a movie. You know, whenever I get, because I work in film and TV as well, whenever I get an idea, usually this bursts into my head, and it's usually a hook. You know, it's, you know, with the Nowhere Child, it was you know, what if someone discovered that they were kidnapped as a kid and they didn't know, you know? So it's really small, but then I kind of start to think about how much story that has and how much story potential. And with the Nowhere Child, I think that could be a mini series. You know, I've been a little bit hesitant to, you know, I don't think it should go on too long, because I don't really, it has a finite ending, but there's a lot there to kind of explore and a lot of characters. Whereas with The Wife and the Widow, I feel it's a nice little small, it's a bit of a smaller story, I think. So I think that would be the way to go. But I mean, nowadays, you know, TV really is just as good, if not better, than movies. You know, as a kid, it was always, you know, I used to love movies, but now you just, I don't know, there's something, it's the same production value really as the big TV shows anyway. And you can get lost in them, and you can spend more time with the characters. And there's really great things. There's whole sort of things that I cut from the Nowhere Child. You know, the first version of the manuscript was 120,000 words, which is way too long. The final product was about 86,000 words. And there's things that I jettisoned for good reason, because they were really bad and ridiculous and dumb. But there were other things that I cut just so it wouldn't, you know, to cut it down. And I think that there's a lot more to those characters and a lot more things to explore. Whereas with The Wife and the Widow, I think you could do that too, but it's something about, I don't know, there's been discussions about both, but I'm right now I'm leaning toward it. I'd prefer it to be a movie, but I don't know. I might change my mind tomorrow. Who knows?
With your writing, is there something in the back of your mind thinking, could this be adapted to television or cinema or something like that? And does that influence the way that you actually write your novels?
Yeah, no, I never think about, I'm not a superstitious person, but I weirdly feel like if I considered that too much, it would jinx it. You know, so I don't, and I also think that, you know, when you start doing that, there's a fear of watering down the work itself, you know. So I never ever think about that, but I do. I have a very visual way of writing. I think, you know, that obviously I go into thoughts and all of that sort of stuff, but it's really, it's really dialogue heavy, and it'll set the scene, and it'll be dialogue, and I'll I might have a page, and I'll try to cut that down to half a page. I'll really try to be visual and tight and stuff like that, which naturally does lend itself to the screen. And I think that's probably because I write for the screen as well. And I studied screenwriting. I thought that screenwriting would be a more realistic, writing in a more realistic thing, and in a sense it is, there's a lot of work, especially in TV, a lot of work in screenwriting. So I studied screenwriting, and really that taught me a lot about film, but it taught me just as much, if not more, about just story and writing prose and writing books. I really draw heavily on that. So that's a very long-winded way of saying, no, I don't think about that, but I think it kind of happens naturally in the style. I think so anyway.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, there's another question here, Christian. What is your favorite genre to read?
It would be horror or thriller. Probably, it's a really hard one. Lately, I don't know. I go back and forth really between, they're my sort of main genres. I'm a big Stephen King fan, so whenever he brings out a book, I go straight to that. And really, I read other bits and pieces of horror, but he's really the main horror writer I read. But I read thrillers from a lot of different authors, partly because one of the cool things that happens when you publish is, people want endorsements for books. So you get all these advanced copies of these really cool thrillers that, with the idea that maybe you'll like it, and maybe you'll have a little comment about it, they'll put on the book. So I read a lot, but I also read a lot. I read a pretty broad spectrum, like I said, Stephen King's one of my favorite authors, but maybe my other really top, okay, I'll give you four. I'll give you my top four. Be Stephen King, which is horror, and Gillian Flynn, who is thriller. So that's that. But also I really love Haruki Murakami, who's a Japanese writer who, he's just, he'll write about someone cooking pasta and listening to jazz, and it's the most compelling thing you've ever read. And the other one is Kurt Vonnegut. I love Kurt Vonnegut. So there's a huge range. One of my favorite books ever was a thriller written in the 90s, sort of a thriller, called The Beach by Alex Garland. They made a terrible movie about it, out of it, but the book is incredible. About a bunch of backpackers who find a secret island and live on the island. So I kind of read a broad range. Actually, speaking of Haruki Murakami, The Nowhere Child, really the way, because Kim, the main character, is quite passive, that sort of became about, because Murakami's protagonists are often quite passive, because, they're going into this bigger world. So really you're just a passenger, and I thought with The Nowhere Child very early on, I thought, what if a Murakami character walked out of a Murakami book and into a Stephen King novel? And that's kind of what I kept thinking about while I was writing it. I read a broad range, but I think, horror, thriller, definitely my top ones. It's weird. It seems like a no-brainer to write in that genre, but it took me a very long time. I tried to write, like I said earlier, that The Nowhere Child was the 5th manuscript I'd started. Earlier ones, they weren't all horror and thriller. They were, one of them was sort of, I guess, a kind of a comedy, or I don't know. And it was this no-brainer, but it took me so long to realize, why aren't you trying to write a book in the genres that you really like? So that's sort of what I did. I haven't written a horror yet, but I have, I wrote a book for Audible, a novella, an audio novella, which will come out in print form eventually. And that was sort of delve into a little bit of supernatural stuff, but really I'm sticking with the thriller. But maybe thriller is my favorite genre. I don't know. I gave you the most convoluted answer then, but hopefully you got something out of it.
There's another question here, which I think you may have answered. Do you have any authors that are your go-to when you need a good read? So always Stephen King. Whatever he brings out, I read it straight away. And even
even the bad stuff I love. It's this weird, he brought out a book a little while ago, a couple of years ago, Elevation, and it kind of got universal. So many people just hated it. I know that what their criticism, I know their criticisms are right, but I just love it anyway. So he's sort of this, he's always my main go-to author. And it's partly because something about his work feels, even if you're reading a new Stephen King, it feels nostalgic. I don't know why. I don't understand it, but for some reason he creates this kind of real. It's something my wife and I talk about a lot, which is this sense of coziness, and how even like The Shining is a good example. These, that they're a family of a mother and a father and a little kid. They go away and stay in this desolate hotel during the off season, and they're the only ones there. And all these horrific, ghostly things happen, but it's also really, really cozy. So there's this real coziness to it. So he's my number one go-to author. Gillian Flynn, if she's not released anything except a short story since Gone Girl, book-wise. So, but when she does. And then I've got a few, J.P. Pomari, an Australian writer. He wrote Call Me Evie, and whenever he brings anything out, he wrote a novella for Audible as well, and I was just straight onto it because he and I have kind of become friends. We had a weird, our sort of careers were on the same trajectory, and we've had books come out at similar times. So you run into each other at events and stuff like that. So we've kind of become buddies, and he's now a go-to author. Jane Harper. It's interesting though, because it's funny. I've recently had to really draw this line. I was talking about how good it was before when you get sent books to endorse, and it is fantastic. But this weird thing started happening where I always had this huge pile of books to read that I'd been sent that I'd not chosen, and that's really a cool thing. But it's also, I wasn't reading so much the books I wanted to read. So now I kind of alternate. Now I go, one book someone sent me, one book that I want, that actually I want to read. So that's sort of what I've been doing. I've been reimagining my reading habits.
Okay, so next question is from one of our attendees. Having read both books, I found them quite similar in terms of themes throughout. Was that always your intention, for example, having gay male main characters in both books?
Well, that was, I've talked a little bit about themes, about how they do just some of them you choose to, so this idea of not knowing, this fear of not knowing the people closest to you and how well can you know them. That was a conscious thing. Like I really was interested in that question, but other things were completely subconscious. So the gay characters were, obviously something I've kind of interested in as well. In particular with the second book, I hope this isn't a spoiler. I don't think it is. I'll be vague. I've been interested, this will sound hilarious taken out of context, but I'm really interested in gay beats, not as an attendee necessarily, but as a strange cultural detail. For anyone who doesn't know, a gay beat, they've got different names all over the world. I think in UK they're called cottages, and they're basically these sort of little areas where usually closeted gay men meet up for sex and stuff like that. And that's just so there's something so weird and sad about that to me, and also from a logistical point of view, like where do they figure it out? These things have gone on for so many years. It's not like there was the internet to say, hey, let's all meet here. It's this weird kind of organic cultural thing that I found really interested in. And I think that just kind of wormed its way in. The second one was more of a, Wife and the Widow, it was more of a, just sort of happened. With the Nowhere Child, it was a little bit more thought out. This small town in Kentucky where the little girl is kidnapped from, it's really religious and it's the 1990s. And so I kind of wanted to make the main character, Jack, the father of the little girl. I wanted to, you do these awful things as a writer where you kind of think, how can I just make things really unpleasant for my characters? You know, how can I put them through hell? You know, and it wasn't enough that that you know, this guy was going to have his little girl snatched. That I wanted to just sort of explore what it would have been like to be gay in a community, and what it's still like in lots of parts of the world. Luckily, obviously, we've come a long way, but what sort of role religion plays, and you know, these ideas of conversion therapy, and how, you know, a lot of religious people, well, the Bible says that, you know, you shouldn't, you know, it's a sin to be gay and all this sort of stuff. And I kind of that's just kind of a really interesting topic. So I think really for the Nowhere Child, it was a little bit more conscious, but with the Wife and the Widow, it just sort of happened naturally. You know, the way I write usually is I will plan, you know, there's these two, they're called, when you're running books in the book industry, there's really usually authors can be broken off into two. It's planners and pantsers. And the planners are the people who plan their novels before they write it. And the pantsers are the people who just fly by the seat of their pants. Like Michael Rowbotham, incredible writer. And he just writes and figures it out. And his books are amazing. Stephen King's another person like that. I think I am a bit of both. I'm sort of a pantser trapped in a plotter's, a planner's body. Because I really like to plan, all like to the, you know, not a sort of loose plan, but pretty detailed plan, you know, break it down to chapters. But what I also do is usually about halfway through is I go off that path. And that's, so far with my third book, I've got a really strong plan and I'm sticking to it. But what I've found is you get to know the characters in a way that you just can't when you're sitting there looking at, you know, when you're sitting there and looking at a Word document and it's just dot points on a page, you don't really know the characters yet. And it's not until you start writing and you get about halfway through and you realize you just know them in a way that you didn't before. You know, an example I've used before is you might want someone to run into a burning building to collect a photo album. And that event kicks off X, Y, and Z, and it's going to be a really cool scene. I can really visualize it. But then you reach that point in the book and you realize, oh, that character would never run into a burning building, you know? So, and I have this rule where character always beats plot. You know, I when I'm watching something or reading something, characters, they're allowed to do something stupid because I think we all do stupid things. But when they do something so completely out of character and plot serving, and you can kind of, it's almost as if you can feel the author's, you know, keys on the page, because it's this really, when it starts to feel manufactured, is when I totally emotionally disengage. So I always kind of follow the characters, and what happened in The Wife and the Widow was just, I just figured out, I won't say too much because it might be a spoiler, but yeah, I just figured out that, oh, that's what's been going on. This has been happening, and yeah, I won't say any more than that, just in case I spoil it.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question. Hi, Christian. Thanks for your time tonight. Can I ask, when you won the award for unpublished manuscript, what percentage of your manuscript remained the same, and how much did the publisher amend? Thank you.
That's a really, really good question. I think, well, the manuscript was, I'd edited it down. The manuscript by then was about 100,000 words. And yeah, like I said, we shaved about 15,000 words off. A lot of that was just me being bloated and redundant. You know, I had this bad habit where I would, you know, every other page, no matter what season it was, someone was walking on dead, crunchy leaves. I must have just got that in my head, to the point where at my book launch, my editors, my publishers gave me a bag, you know, a really fancy bag full of dead leaves, because I was just obsessed with dead leaves. So a lot of it was just cutting out stuff that didn't need to be there. But then they're really, in spirit, it was really, really similar. Not a lot changed. There was one thing that changed. Well, one or two, you know, one, it's difficult to talk about with the spoilers, but there was a character in it who was so obviously a red herring that they suggested that, you know, he was insane. There's a person, if you've read it, and I won't spoil it, but there's a person who is kind of out in the woods, kind of a crazy guy who was a Vietnam vet. That's all I'll say. And in the original manuscript, he was just bonkers. And there was a weird scene that I wrote where he was washing. This is going to sound so strange. And if you've read the book, you will think, what the hell was I thinking? But there was a scene where he was sort of washing himself in the river, and he was naked, and he started swimming after someone naked, like really crazy stuff. And they were like, hey, this guy's so crazy that everyone's going to know he's just a red herring. So dial it back a bit and things like that. And then there was another thing that my editor came up with, and I won't be able to say it because it is a big spoiler, but it's just a very, very small emotional moment for the main character, Stuart. And it happens late in the book where this thing is revealed, and it's a small moment, but it completely explains who he is and why he's done everything he has, explains everything about him. And that wasn't even in it. That was completely my editor's idea. She said, what about this? And now it feels as if I was writing him with that in mind, but that was completely, that was completely them. And really, and that's the other cool thing. I don't know, I guess I was kind of naive about the editing process. I had this idea that, well, they fix your spelling and they fix your grammar, but of course it's way deeper than that. But what they made clear very early on, and then what I experienced, was that they just want to make the story better. They just want to make you seem like a better writer, and so it really, the only things that they cut were things that should have been cut, that was things that I'd screwed up. And the things they added made the book so much better and made it so much richer. And I've been saying this thing for a while where, I almost think like your main, because you have multiple editors. When you sell into multiple territories, there's a lot of different people, but you really work with the core. My Australian editor, Ruby, I work with. That's my editor, And I've said this thing recently where it's almost like their name should be on the cover with the author, because they do so much. And I never ever felt like what they were suggesting would hurt the book. And anytime it got close, I would defend it in a way that they never pushed it. They always made it very clear that I was the boss and it was my baby and all that sort of stuff. So, and it's really great. Like with what I found with the second book, I guess it's something I had to learn with The Wife and the Widow. But now what I know going into the third book is that they're kind of a safety net between, they're this filter between you and the public, where, they're just going to make your work better. So really it's this, I've heard nightmares about authors working with editors that their views don't align, but touch wood, my experience has been nothing but positive. So it's been, never did they force me to do anything I didn't want. So, which is good.
Now we're drawing close to our 8 o'clock
Oh,
scheduled
God,
finish, but we've got 10 more questions to go. Would you mind hanging around a little bit longer, Christian?
Of course, absolutely.
So we won't take any more questions. We'll try and get through the ones that have been put through.
Yeah.
So what alternative endings did you have in mind?
I had, for The Wife and the Widow, there's two big ones. One I can't tell you because it kind of spoils things, but another one I wanted, it might spoil. Okay, I won't say The Wife and the Widow one because that will be too much. But with the Nowhere Child, I won't spoil anything, but it's a bit older. So you'll know, I'll tell you the character that I was originally it was originally going to be the kidnapper. So by hearing this, I'll give you a 30-second warning. You can block your ears for 30 seconds. But originally with the Nowhere Child, I wanted the little girl, Sammy, who goes missing, her older sister, Emma. I was very clear in my mind that she was going to be the kidnapper. And I had a whole reason why. And the whole back half of the Nowhere Child in the original plan was different, and it all steered in that direction. And then I got about halfway through and I realized it was partly writing that character and writing her as an adult and as a young person, and partly writing the person who ended up being responsible for the crime, that it just I suddenly knew that she was not the right person, and the person, sorry, I know I'm being super cryptic, but the person who was eventually responsible for the crime, as soon as I realized that's who it was, everything else clicked into place. And I of course then went back to the beginning and made it look like I had intended that the entire way. So, but yeah, I've got a few good ones in The Wife and the Widow, but it would be, for anyone who hasn't read it, it would be, I kind of have to spoil certain things, so I better leave that.
Okay. Next question: would you consider using pre-existing characters in a new novel?
Yeah, I would love that. I would love to write, one day in the future, love to write a series, maybe a 3 or 5 books. That had never even occurred to me, but quite a few people, there's a character in The Wife and the Widow, a young cop called Bobby, and she's just this island cop, and I don't know, people weirdly really, well, I mean, I really like her. She's a cool character, but she's quite a small character. And I've had a really positive response. People really seem to like her. And quite a few people have said, why don't you, she could go on into further books and stuff like that. And maybe I will. Maybe I really love that character. And I would like to write a series. I think what stops me is I'm yet to find, I think when, procedurals books and stuff from the perspective of a detective, they're really amazing. Some of I love, like the Silence of the Lambs series and stuff like Red Dragon, things like that, who, you're in the head of the detective and everything. I really love, but so far I try to tell my stories from a slightly different perspective than what's normal. I tend not to kind of be in the heads of the cops too much. I was a little bit in the Nowhere Child. And that's really why I haven't thought about a series. I haven't found that character that could go over each, because it's almost like you want a really interesting perspective, but then you don't want to have to keep inventing ways for this character to somehow be involved in these crimes, so, and a cop or a journalist feels natural, but I've read a lot of those books and I've read them done well. And I really want to find a slightly different perspective. And maybe I will if and when I find that, it's definitely a career thing that one day I'll write at least a couple of books, a sequel to a book or something like that. I'd also like to do just little hints that in my mind, all the books that I've written take place within the same universe. So I'd like to do little hints to reveal that to the reader. And I'm doing a little something in the 3rd book that kind of connects the books. But yeah, absolutely. If I found that right character, and maybe it's Bobby, but we'll see. We'll see. I certainly wouldn't be opposed to it.
So next question, I'm curious, has the expectation that comes with your success altered your feelings or passions on reading and writing?
Certainly not on writing. As I said before, The Wife and the Widow was challenging. I had to go through a lot, because it was that second album thing. I had to kind of, I battled with things that I never thought I'd, it's this fantastic situation, an amazing situation to be in where you're writing a second book, but it was really challenging and there were a lot of negative voices in my head and I kind of got past that. But now that I'm past that, I've fallen back in love with writing. I've always loved it. I love the craft. The fact that I get to do it every day it feels like almost like a joke. Like at any second, they're going to say, that it was a big joke, a big prank, But with writing, it has a little bit. So I kind of touched on it before, I get sent books, which is amazing, but you need to really be careful that reading doesn't start to feel like work, because and that's why I've started doing this thing where I kind of break it up. I read one book that someone has sent me and then one book that I've been wanting to read. And that seems to be a really good pattern now. I'm loving reading again. But there was a period where I felt, it almost felt a bit like work. And when you're reading books to endorse, I started to, and I do this a lot with film and TV, where you start to look at the machinations behind it. You don't look at it just as a story. You think, oh, why did they make that decision? And you kind of pick it apart in a technical way. I'm really bad. I drive my wife crazy with, we'll watch a movie and afterwards I'll say, oh, I wish this had have happened. And, I kind of pick it apart. And I think that it's fun to do that, but there's also a danger because what drew you to that world. I've read books since I was a kid and I've loved reading, and what draws you to that world and what drew you kind of, it's almost, you don't want to risk losing it. Yeah. So that's yeah, my relationship to reading was a bit of a challenge. I had to find my new rhythm. But with writing, no, now just, it kind of feels like all the stuff that I had to used to have to do on the weekends and at night, I just do during the day now, which is very pleasant.
Okay, now I've got 3 questions. I'm going to combine them all together. Have you always loved reading and writing as a child, and what are your earliest memories of writing? What books did you enjoy during your childhood, and when did you consider becoming an author? So combine those questions.
Yeah, I sort of my earliest. The earliest books that, and the earliest books I really, really loved that I remember as a kid were all Enid Blyton books. The famous 5 and Magic Faraway Tree and stuff like that. But really, more obscure ones. Like my favorite book for a long time was Shadow the Sheepdog, which is just about a dog who gets into adventures. I named my first dog Shadow. And so really, Enid Blyton was really who, yeah, I think that's the first memory I have, my first real connection. And of course, Roald Dahl and Paul Jennings, and it kind of went on from there. But then, but I would also encourage to tell stories, my mum and I would go for these walks when I was really little, and she would kind of like, she kind of did this thing where, it's weird now that I think about it, where she'd go up to a tree. We'd be walking through the bush, and she'd go up to a tree and say, oh, here's a clue. What does this clue say? And she'd kind of sort of like talk me into telling this story. And I had to figure out what the clue was for, but then, what the clue was and what the clue was for, and suddenly we were solving a mystery. And so I really was encouraged to tell stories from a really young age. And then I'd write short stories and I would draw lots of pictures. And then there was a moment, I think, where I thought, geez, this would be good to do for a living, and maybe I could. And it was, I guess I was about 16 or 17, and I was in literature class in high school, and we had to write a short story, and my teacher, Mr. Bailey, read it out to the class, and it was the coolest, sort of terrifying and satisfying experience. And I thought, oh wow, I want to chase that. And the fact that he'd read it out and he'd picked mine out. There's mine and another story, a girl in the class, and the fact that we were the only 2 that had been picked out to read just kind of made me feel, I don't know, I guess special. And I started to think, wow, I could potentially try to do this for a living. And of course, it's you tell your teachers that, and some of them were really encouraging, and others were like, well, no, just, okay, do that as a hobby, but get it back up and things like that. And I really just ignored all of those people, really. I think it was partly, I had a very, like I said, my family were always very supportive, to my face anyway. Actually, it was funny because after I got published, my brother Jamie came up to me and he was like, oh God, I've got to apologize. And I was like, what are you apologizing for? And he said, we've all been bitching about you for years, saying, when is he going to get a real job? When's he going to give up on this crazy stuff? And, luckily I proved them wrong. So yeah, that was really, I've gone so far off the question, but hopefully I answered it in that rambling mess somewhere.
Okay, just moving on to other themes. Your main characters have been women. Do they begin as a neutral character, or do you consciously decide to be a woman from the outset? Is main character in third book a woman?
The character in the main character in the third book is a man. That was partly because of the themes explored in the book, and partly because I just really had to write a male perspective. Otherwise, I've got to do it. It's a third book. but really with the when I have an idea very, very early on in the process, I will usually get, kind of the hook, like the main concept, what if this happened? And then very, very shortly after that, I will get an image of the main character. And usually they're in a weird, I remember with The Nowhere Child, I got the main character, Kim, popped into my head, and she was in the pasta aisle at a supermarket. And I don't know why. Maybe I was shopping for pasta at that point or something. But it's quite a whole thing. So really the characters, there was no other reason that really in the first book, at least, no reason why she couldn't have been a man, but it just, when I imagined it, it was just, she was just always a woman. And with the second book, it was a little bit different. I was sort of interested in the way women get labeled, like sort of like, that's why it's called the wife and the widow, that they, when I mean, in extreme situations it happens. So if you're the widow of a murder victim, or the wife of the man who killed them or something, you get labeled, and there's a certain amount of things that come with that. But also, weird things like, you never, working mother is an expression, but working father isn't an expression. There's this weird thing, there's this weird double standard where women just get labeled and sort of, pigeonholed more, I think. So I was a little bit more conscious with the wife and the widow, but because I want to kind of explore with the third book, it's sort of about sort of the expectations. Sometimes, the expectations, good and bad, that are put on men, and also what it kind of, what it is to be a man. This expression, be a man, and sort of what that means to be a man, and what does that expression mean, and what does it mean to people? How do people chase that? And so, yeah, so there was a little bit of thought that went into that, but usually, generally, at a really, really basic level, if very early on the character's either a man or a woman, or it's really well formed. That usually their age, their gender, and often their job. It comes to me really quickly. So, yeah.
Okay, what character's perspective did you find the most difficult to write?
The most difficult, I think, was Kate in The Wife and the Widow. So there's Kate and Abby, and Abby's the sort of roughish island local, and she's really funny and kind of brutally honest and sort of raw. Whereas Kate is very, she's a stay-at-home mum. Her husband is very successful, and she's kind of feeling a bit, I don't know, kind of a bit nothing, a bit what have I got to offer? And she's quite passive, really, really passive to begin with. I really think about the arcs, the journeys my characters go on, and I really try to start them in a place that is very, very different from where they end up. And really early on, I knew I wanted Kate to start off as really passive and sort of weak and dependent on men in her life, and then really wanted her to shed all of that and become something really strong, and that's what she did. So the second half of the book, I loved writing Kate, but the first half, it was difficult to write her sometimes, because sometimes you just want your characters to speak up and say something, and it's really fun. I'm kind of I'm an introvert, and I'm fine around my friends and around people, and events like this, when it's sort of fun, and you're on and you're talking about things that you enjoy. But in certain social situations, I shrink a little bit, and I have to sometimes, force myself to kind of be a bit more outgoing, and that's fine. But when you're writing, it means when you write someone, I really love writing sort of boisterous, rude characters, and characters who just speak their mind. I really love it, because I find those things difficult to do. So with Kate, it was something about writing her so passive, and I almost wanted her to feel I wanted to feel like her life is boring, and her kind of, and that was challenging. Because you just wanted her to speak up, I think, and eventually she does, but before it got to that point, it was probably it was difficult, fun but difficult.
Okay, next one's a comment. Thank you for writing The Nowhere Child. I love the book. Looking forward to reading The Wife in the Window.
Thank you.
Now, how did you pull off the twist in The Wife and the Widow? Did you have to start with the twist and then backfill, or write from one character's perspective at a time?
It was incredibly challenging doing that twist. As I said earlier, I knew what I wanted it to be, but there were so many different ways to get there. The Nowhere Child has a big twist as well, but it was kind of, it's a bit more traditional, I suppose. And The Wife and the Widow, I knew it was a bit more ambitious and a bit more sort of strange. And I think for a twist to work, it needs to come out of nowhere. It needs to feel like a shock and a surprise, but it immediately needs to, you need to be able to kind of think back and things to make sense. And, okay. And so that was a big part of, I planned it as much as I could, but it did change during the process. But really my main worry was leaving enough clues so it would make sense and it wouldn't feel out of nowhere, but also, not showing my hand too early. I've run into a couple of people who pick the twist, but generally people don't. And I think, my American publisher, she didn't read it. I didn't tell her anything about it until the first draft was done. I didn't tell her anything about the twist. And when she read it, she loved the twist, and she said, go back and load it up with clues, because you kind of almost want it to feel inevitable when you finally know. Affirm Press, my Australian publishers, also do this cool thing where they will give their staff, only a very limited amount of people will, with The Wife and the Widow, it was just my publisher and editor who had read the manuscript, knew what was going on, and they don't show everyone. And then they send maybe the first 100 pages out to their staff, and they run a competition. They've done this with the first two books. You read the first 100 pages, and then you've got to write what you think will happen. And it's a cool, fun thing for them, because if the closest person gets a prize and all this sort of stuff. But really, it's a really smart way to gauge whether or not whether you're showing too much of your hand or not enough of your hand. And so, that's a big, that was a big, a scary thing, because it could also, I knew if it worked, it would be really cool, but I just had this fear that what if it just doesn't work? And then, because when the twist is revealed, it's revealed, a little earlier than than what's traditional. And with that knowledge, you can, I'm trying to be careful with my words. When you have that knowledge, you can sort of start to pick the end, because things start to make sense. So I really wanted to, it was about when to reveal it, when to, and I experimented a lot. I experimented a whole deal. And I wrote thousands and thousands of words off on tangents and trying to make it work. And I learned a lot about that. I learned a lot about, with my third book, I've been a lot smarter. I've taken a lot more time to plan and think things through. And hopefully I'm saving myself just writing 20,000 word tangents that end up getting abandoned.
So time for two more questions. My son is 7, wants to be an author. Do you have any tips on how to encourage and foster this love at a young age?
Yeah, I think that, just to try to instill in them just a love of reading. And if he already wants to be an author, he's probably already got that. And I think just encourage storytelling. I read somewhere that Leanne Moriarty, I hope I'm pronouncing her name wrong, right? I read somewhere where, because her sister's a writer as well, I'm not exactly sure of the full details, but I believe her father would buy stories off them, tell them to, they would, and forgive me if I'm getting this wrong, but it was something like this, where he would, to give them pocket money, they'd have to write him a story. And I think that's a really cool thing. As I was saying before, my mum, even sort of, I didn't really realize what she was doing, but she kind of really encouraged me to tell stories and that sort of thing. So I think as long as they're you're encouraging reading a lot and writing a lot. I think that's brilliant. And I think make sure he doesn't hear. People love to tell you that, well, oh, it's such a hard field to get into, and it's, chances are you won't, and all this sort of stuff, and blah blah blah. And it is really difficult. But I heard so many times, first I heard, oh, well, you won't get published, and I heard, well, if you get published, you can't make a living out of books anymore, and they'd say it with such confidence that you would believe it, and it's just completely false. So I think teaching him to listen to the right voices and block out the wrong ones, I think that's probably the best advice I can give, I think.
Okay, so last question. Love both of your books. Is there anywhere we can go to hear you discuss them in more detail with plenty of spoilers?
Very rarely do I get to talk about spoilers. Probably not. I did do one event in my whole, my career so far, that was a book club, and it was a spoiler event. So everyone had been there and had read it, so we could just talk about spoilers. And it was the most wonderful and cathartic experience, because I spent so much of these things, in my head saying, don't say too much. So I don't think there is. No, you can always email me specific things. Like I said at the beginning, it's just christian-white.com, and you've got a little, little email, contact function there. So you can always feel free to email me questions and stuff like that. But I don't think there's anywhere recorded that I actually talk about spoilers. That's tragic, really. But we'll have to change that.
Yes. One of the pitfalls of being a thriller writer, I guess.
Exactly.
Put out the spoilers. Well, thanks, Christian. That's been really good, and you've been really generous with your time, and we're really grateful with that. So that's about all for tonight. On behalf of everyone tonight, I'd like to thank you for your insights into your writing. Thanks everyone for attending. Special thanks for Steve for handling all the technical side tonight and keeping us on air. We hope to see you again at another event, another of these Forgets events, and don't forget to participate with on the poll that Steve will be putting up soon. So good night, everyone, and keep safe.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.